Abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
About 8 years ago, my girlfriends and I would download Plenty of Fish and meet random guys to take exploring with us. Definitely not the smartest, especially since we were out in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. This one night we met a guy. Let's call him Todd. Todd was an odd guy. He seemed socially distant, and when he slid into the back of my SUV, I instantly got the feeling of regret. We were going to a place called Roney's Point, a very interesting place in West Virginia. You should look it up if you're into ghost and haunted history. Todd wanted to stay in the car for a bit to scope out the area while us girls went ahead to explore. Red flag. I was so sure he was going to try and steal my car. We went into the abandoned hospital, and out of nowhere, here comes Todd around the corner. Scared us so bad, we let out a slight scream. Tom started making comments about how his great-grandfather was a security guard at the asylum. It's right next to the hospital. And that his grandfather told him some stories about how they would shoot at the sick individuals for fun. He laughed and said, "How much fun would that be?" We continued to explore and Todd just hung out in the background. We eventually left and Todd insisted on sitting behind me in the car. I needed gas, so I started driving to the nearest gas station. Maybe 2 minutes up the winding road, I feel his slimy hands creep up and start massaging my shoulders as I'm driving. I keep leaning forward to give him the hint that I was not interested. As he is massaging my shoulders, he's telling my friends and I how stupid we are for inviting random strangers out, how we never know who's getting into our car, and how they might hurt us, etc. He started laughing again, and I will never forget the tone of his voice or the grip of his hands on my shoulders. He said,
Maybe that person's in the car with you right now.
I pulled into the gas station and demanded he get out of the car. He did, and I left him there. We got back home and my friends went on to Plenty of Fish to block him, but he already blocked her or deleted his account. We never heard from him again, but we stopped inviting random people to urban explore and ghost hunt with us. Now, this is something I really want to talk about, to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us. So what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad. Until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now, when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to the lack of parents and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it, and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small playground with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up when, all of a sudden, we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety. But looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking towards the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building. But we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right, which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the place. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood, and torn beige pants. He did not have any socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine.
"You guys here for the feast?"
He said, each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge and we bolted out of the room, all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us, pulling with all of our strength to close it. And just before we did, I could see the silhouette of a man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human features I could see. As we sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found a man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. This happened over 20 years ago. There was a phase my friends and I went through where we would go on dares and little nightly adventures. It was a late summer night. I went with 3 other friends and we 4 would always get up to mischief together. The dare that night was to go into a famous abandoned hospital, which was about 20 minutes away by car. Actually, I had been to this abandoned hospital 3 times before, and I wasn't all that impressed or interested in going again. I mean, there was nothing but mountains and fields as far as the eye could see, as it was in the countryside, and there were no girls there, so I was all like, what's the point, guys? But they managed to convince me that there wasn't much else to do that night, and it would be fun. There are a bunch of rumors about that place. They say that it was originally a mental institution, and that it was the largest abandoned hospital in all of Kanto. They say that it's cursed, and there are even rumors about a secret basement. There were plenty of rumors like these, but now I am older, I realized that I didn't ever doubt the credibility of these rumors. Unlike today, back then those rumors were spread by word of mouth, and possibly by chainmail or text messages. We didn't have the internet to rely on. My friend drove. We took flashlights. It was really dark since it was in the middle of nowhere. We walked a few minutes in the dark, and the road widened a little, and then we saw the hospital. It gave off a strange presence that night. It felt different. It was a 3-story building with a rooftop. This rooftop was said to be one of the most active spots for paranormal activities. They say that something lingers there. Well, the first time I came to the hospital, I thought that it was pretty scary. But now it was the 3rd time, and nothing had happened the previous times I'd came. I wasn't really feeling creeped out or anything. It could have been because I was with 3 other guys too. We were passing through the overgrown bushes and thickets outside the hospital ground, and that was when I came up with an idea. It wasn't really a dare if we all went as a group, I said to my friends. So I said, why don't we go up to the roof one by one, and then, when you get there, call the next person up. For the other guys, it was their first time, so I was hoping to see them getting all freaked out. I thought it was a pretty decent idea. We played rock, scissors, paper to decide the order of who would go up first. I will refer to the friend who went first as A from here on out. A started off through the busted-in entrance doors, and we stood outside and watched. My 2 other friends were joking around and saying things like, why don't we just leave him here and go home? Then, we heard A shout from the rooftop. Oi! He got up there faster than I expected. He must have sprinted. I looked up at A, and there were some other silhouettes up there with him, waving down to us. Wait, there are other people here? I said aloud. As I said, the abandoned hospital had become kind of legendary, as there was still medical equipment and records scattered throughout the building. It still felt like a hospital, and at the same time it felt very abandoned. Does that make sense? I think this is why there were so many rumors. So it was popular with young people in our area as well as people from outside the area. There were some who just wanted to see it from a tourist point of view too, I guess. If you drove past on a weekend, you could always see cars parked up there and people taking photos. I'm not sure if all these people went in, but it proved to be a popular place. I said to my friend next to me, man, there's people here even on weekday nights? This ain't good, man. Then, he was called to the roof, which only left me and 1 other friend. Then, I heard my friends call out to my final friend. Oi! They shouted. I looked closer, and there seemed to be even more people up there than before. I guessed that they were making friends. There looked to be about 10 people there. It didn't seem fun if there was a whole gang of people there. It was supposed to be spooky, right? While I was thinking this, I heard my friend, who was the last to leave my company, call out to me. Oi! Charming. Everyone on the roof seemed to be pacing around restlessly. I headed into the entrance. The walls were scrawled with graffiti. I climbed the stairs to the roof. When I got to the roof, I felt a blast of cold night air against my skin, and then I was shocked by something. I could only see my 3 friends on the roof. I felt sure I was about to be pranked, but I decided to ask the obvious question. Guys, weren't there others up here with you? We just looked at one another, puzzled for a while in silence. The wind blew and suddenly, we all heard a terrible voice calling,
Oi!
Someone started running and we all followed. We bolted down through the abandoned hospital through the gap in the fence. I took a look back on the roof and I swear I saw shadowy figures moving back and forth on the roof. The wind carried the dreadfully moaning "oi" sound. We scrambled into the car and hightailed it out of there. We stopped at the closest light source, which happened to be a convenience store. We never went back. I am a 28-year-old female. The story I'm about to tell you happened back in 2016 with my best friend Chris. Now, ever since the day Chris and I met, we have always got ourselves in the dumbest things ever. I mean, Chris ran away once and had my nerves all messed up. But he came back because he had no money. We were not the smartest teens, but we still enjoyed life. So one summer night, Chris and I were hanging, and we were trying to think of a place to explore like we always did. At the time, I told him I've never been to the old rock house in Greenwood, South Carolina. Now, before I get started, let me give you a little history on the rock house. A man named Thomas Payne Tolbert built a fireproof house in 1926. The fireproof house was constructed entirely from stone, concrete, glass and steel. After years of family homes burning down, Tolbert lived in the detached kitchen and used the large house to store family heirlooms. Tolbert lived his later lives in isolation. The now crumbling fortress is accessible only by foot, and no one has ever lived inside its walls. You can look up way more about the history online if you like. Now, back to my story. I've always been told the rock house has many spirits in and around it, but like I said at the time, I've never been to it. So with that said, Chris and I took my cousin's car and headed out to the old rock house. I've heard of people going in the daytime, but never heard people say they went at night. We, being dumb, went at night because why not? Ghosts and spirits never bothered me too much, being that I've seen them my whole life. Once we pull up to the woods and park on the side of the road, I get the bad feeling run all over my body. I sit there for a moment. I believe Chris sees this look on my face and asked if I still wanted to do this. Something is telling me not to get out. But at the same time, I want to see this place, even at night. Yeah, let's go see how scary this place is, I told him. Hell yeah, let's do it, he replied. We get out and start walking through the woods. As we are walking, we have our phones out for light, and we're making jokes, acting silly like we always do. We can never take anything seriously, no matter what. As we are walking, we don't realize how quiet it is to be in the woods, at night, in the middle of summer. We find our way to the front of the house. Chris is in front of me, and we are looking at the house. No front door and no windows. All you can see is pure darkness. For some reason, I just can't move, even though Chris is walking to what used to be the door. At this moment, I realize we are in complete darkness, and there are no sounds. No animals, no bugs, no wind or anything. Just pure silence. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I see something in the top left window. But before I completely look, I hear something to the left of me, and I look over. I see nothing, only the darkness. A feeling of dread falls over me, but nothing is there. Chris is now at the door of the house and looks inside. I look at the windows, and there it is. Something is there in the window looking down at me. My body turns cold. Those eyes. I'll never forget those eyes, burning a hole in my soul. Bright, yellow reddish eyes like fire. All of a sudden I hear Chris say, "Oh, hell no." He turns to run to me, but my body is still frozen. He grabs my wrist and pulls me to run. He never lets me go. As we are running, we are jumping over fallen trees and everything on the ground that people have left over time. As we run, we realize something is running beside us, and I don't dare to look back. My body is now in pilot mode as Chris has the grip still on my wrist pulling me. My mind is blank, and my heart is racing. At one time, I feel like I can feel the breath of whatever is chasing us. The moment we make it to the car, everything comes back to me, and I'm back in control of my mind and body. We jump in the car, and Chris goes to start the car. He has his face in the steering wheel as he tries to start the car. But it's dead. The car is dead. We start freaking out with my head buried between my legs and Chris is hiding his face. I yell out, "This is it, Chris. This is how we die. This is why people like us die in movies. Because we do dumb shit like this." Chris yells back at me, "Shut up. We're not gonna die. The car will start." I can still feel this thing outside of the car. It's just there. Is this why there's so many spirits here? Does it take the souls of people it has caught coming here? I feel it looking at us. Something wants me to look, but at the same time, a voice in my head is telling me not to. I want to cry. The car starts and Chris tries to speed off. We start going down the road, but then one of the tires blows. We are now on the side of the road again, and we just sit there, not wanting to get out. It's quiet again. The feeling of being watched is still there. Luckily for us, a guy in a truck pulls up behind us. I feel safe right now. The guy pulls over and helps Chris change the tire. I hold my phone as a light with my back to the woods. I still have that feeling. I want to turn and see what is there, but I dare not to. Something is telling me not to look. After the tire gets fixed, we head to the huddle house close by to calm down. The poor lady working that night sees something is wrong, and with what little money we have, the lady helps us pay for a meal. The next few days, strange things start happening around my house. For example, I'm in the kitchen fixing something for lunch. My roommate and I are talking like normal, and the cutting board goes flying across the kitchen. She gives me this look and says, "See what you caused?" Shit like that keeps happening for no reason, all because you wanted to visit haunted places. I pick up the cutting board. At this point, I feel like I need to make things right. I've always been told that if you disturb the dead, that you have to make things right. So with that being said, that weekend I go to see some friends who don't live too far from the rock house and tell them I need to go there. So we do. This time it's full daylight. Once we get there, I have this feeling, but I don't say a word. Once we get to the house, my friends go in to look around. They explore the place, inside and out. I look to the left of me and see nothing, but the feeling is there. My body is weak. As I walk in, I look in the direction that Chris saw something at. Then, I look into the room to the left of me and see the room is full of designs in paint all over the room. The whole house is covered the same way. But there is something about this one room. I walk into the room. There is a pentagram with all the markings around it. I walk over to it and examine it closely. I walk around it, seeing if it's done right, and my eyes see that it is. I yell out to my friends, I think someone tried to summon a demon or something." As soon as the words leave my mouth, something comes crashing down. I nope the hell out of there and just start running out of the house, sadly leaving my friends inside not meaning to. All I do is run through the woods yelling, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I don't stop until I'm out of the woods. My friends come after me wondering what is going on, so I tell them about the other night and what just happened as well. At this point, I just want to leave. We all get into the car. The friend driving goes to start the car. It's dead, just like the other night, but in a different car. My mind goes back to the other night, and this big dark creature comes to my mind for some reason. I'd never seen it before. Was it the thing chasing us that night? Was it putting itself into my mind to scare me more? So many questions. I try my best not to freak out. I called my roommate to come pick us up. As we are waiting, a car pulls up. He must live on this road and knows something happened. He says every time someone goes to the house, their car is dead when they get back. He helps jumpstart the car, and we go down the road. I see my roommate and I jump out of the car and jump into mine. I speed off as fast as I can, wanting to get as far away from this place as possible. My friends meet me at my house, and I made a promise to myself to never go back to the rock house. For some reason, Chris and I stopped hanging out. We didn't get into a fight or anything, we just stopped being friends, and we never spoke about what happened that night until a few weeks after. We both seemed to have forgotten that night. I called him and asked him what it was that he saw that night inside the house, to make him do what he did. He doesn't remember what he saw, but he remembers that night. I thought I wouldn't forget, but I did until a few weeks ago. Someone told me that a brain will block out something so traumatizing that you won't remember what happened and live your life like normal. Maybe that's what our brains did for us, so we won't live in fear forever. Okay, so this was a couple of years back. I think around March or April of 2019. I had recently moved into a new apartment, eager to start fresh. Everything seemed normal until one evening when I noticed something a little strange. As I walked past my bathroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of someone behind me, an exact copy of myself. My heart raced as I turned around, but there was no one there. Shaken and unsure what I had seen, I did a thorough search of the house, but could find no one. Not really wanting to be alone that night, I called a friend to come over. Over the next few days, the sightings continued. What I now know was a doppelganger, mimicked my every move, always lurking in the reflection but never visible in the physical space. I checked around on Reddit, seeking similar stories so I can get advice on what to do with it. I found many different stories of encounters with mirror doppelgangers, warning me of the potential dangers. As the days passed, the doppelganger grew bolder. It started to deviate from my actions, expressing a sinister smile when I looked terrified. Desperate for answers, I searched folklore and discovered that seeing one's own doppelganger was an omen of impending tragedy. Terrified, I reached out to a local paranormal expert. They conducted a cleansing ritual in my apartment, and it seemed to work. The mirror's reflection returned to normal, but the memory of that chilling encounter still keeps me up at night. Two instances of seeing my sister's doppelganger. First one happened several years ago. We have double doors leading into our living room that you can look through from the kitchen. We were both young at this time and pranked each other, so when I noticed her hiding in a small corner right behind the double doors, I called her out. "I know you're there, S. I can see you." She didn't move. All I can see is black hair and a white t-shirt. The corner is in shadows. I called her out again. "You're not going to scare me. I see you." I walked over and slammed the door back to reveal her. No one there. I went to her bedroom to ask her if she'd been in the living room just now, and she wasn't even wearing a white t-shirt, and no way did she have time to move all the way into her room and change clothes. The second incident happened just a few months ago. Same sister, but she has a kid now. They were living with us at the time, and my nephew liked to sleep with our parents. Around midnight one night, I hear my mum up to let the dogs out to pee. I go to the kitchen, again with the doors, yes, and I'm digging some cookies while talking with my mum. On the other side of the house, I hear my sister's bedroom door open, and I'm facing the living room doors. So I see, when she comes from the hallway leading to her room and crosses the living room towards our parents' room. Again, black hair and white t-shirt. I think to myself, what is she doing? And then quickly chalk it up to my nephew being in my parents' room, and she's going to go get him. Not even 30 seconds later, I hear the bathroom door slam on the complete opposite end of the house. My sister got up to use the bathroom, not get my nephew, and I confirmed it was her in the bathroom. No one else was in the house but my parents, my sister, my nephew, and me. But I know I saw someone clear as day walk through the living room that looked like my sister. To clarify, I was looking down when I heard the bedroom door. While I was looking down, my sister slipped by me to the bathroom. My mum saw her, and when I looked up, I saw the doppelganger. Then I heard the bathroom door. It happened very quickly. I asked my mum if that was my sister in the bathroom, and she said, yeah, which made me realize that I'd seen someone or something else walk by. I even went into my parents' room, but no one was there but my dad. My nephew was asleep in my sister's room. Have you ever seen a doppelganger before? I saw one once. Really, really scary. Alright, to start off, they say that once you see a doppelganger, the person whom the doppelganger imitates is doomed to either die very soon or come down with a serious accident. This is, of course, a myth, but I'm seriously freaked out now. Alright, to start off, I was lazily walking around Chinatown because I was bored and had nothing to do at home. Then, I noticed someone whom had the exact same clothes on as me, which was jeans, a long white sleeve, and black clothes. What was funny was that he had the same hairstyle as me, the short and spiky kind. I thought it was rather weird, so I tailed him. He seemed to know his way pretty well and stopped to browse some lady's clothing. I managed to get a glimpse of his face, and to my very surprise, he was me. He seemed to have noticed me because he looked at me straight in the eyes and grinned before disappearing into the crowds. I tried to follow him, but he simply vanished. I shrugged at that moment. Maybe I was just plain tired, which I was. So I decided to head back to Chinatown Point and catch a train home from there. As I was crossing the street, I saw him again. This time he was walking towards me, grinning all the while as I walked towards him. We stopped directly in front of each other. "What the hell?" I murmured, but he simply grinned and continued walking past me. I swore he brushed shoulders with me. He felt solid. That's when I realized the light was going red. I quickly dashed the remaining part of my journey across the road, when a speeding car brushed past me at a hair's breadth. I was so close that its side mirror managed to get a good swipe at my stomach. I just stood there, a little dumbfounded. The driver quickly got out of his car and apologized. I muttered it was nothing to worry about, and just sat down. The driver wanted to make up for it, but I simply said I was fine. He left soon enough. I cautiously made the rest of my way back to my house. Only when I entered my room did I feel safe. I nearly could have gotten seriously injured or could have died. Just to let you know, It was a blazing 2 p.m. in the heat. Don't question why I was wearing long sleeves in that weather. I myself have no idea to my queer tastes. Question is, why did I see a doppelganger of myself? In my late 30s, I had a deep love for the ocean. I was a seasoned sailor, and my life revolved around the sea. It was during one of my solo voyages on a calm, moonlit night that I encountered something that, to this day, I still cannot explain. I was navigating my small sailboat through tranquil waters, the only source of light being the gentle glow of the moon and the stars. As I scanned the horizon, I saw a silhouette standing at the bow of my boat, perfectly mirroring my own stance. My heart raced as I stared at the figure. It was like looking at a reflection of myself, dressed in the same weathered sailor's gear that I wore. But there was something uncanny about the figure's expression. It was devoid of any emotion, and they made no move nor sound. I tried to call out, but my voice faltered. The silence of the open sea was punctuated only by the gentle lap of the waves against my boat. The figure remained unmoving, locked in an inexplicable connection with me. The minutes stretched into hours, and the figure showed no signs of life. It was as though they were an apparition, a mysterious stowaway on my vessel. The thought of an extra presence aboard my boat in the middle of the vast ocean was both unsettling and surreal. As the night wore on, I continued to sail, unable to tear my gaze away from the silent figure. There were no conversations, no explanations, just a shared, eerie connection between us. When dawn finally broke, the figure began to fade, dissipating like a dream upon waking. I was left alone with the early morning light, questioning my sanity and the nature of this inexplicable encounter. Only as the memory lingered did I consider the strangeness of the incident, realizing that the figure I saw had been more than just an illusion. Only years later, remembering this incident, I started searching the web for some answers. I came across some subreddits about doppelgangers, and it seems to fit the description. What do you think? Was this a doppelganger? Or was I just seeing things? Hello everyone. This experience occurred in February of the year of telling this, so my memory is pretty clear in regards to detail. This past year was my senior year of college, and I was thrilled to be living with an alumni of my sorority who I am very close with. We'll call her Abby for clarity's sake. Abby and I weren't actually supposed to live in the apartment we ended up in. We were originally going to be living in a townhouse with 2 other girls, but they started so much drama a month before we were supposed to move in that we had to contact our landlord to find a different place within their company to live. Thankfully, we found a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom basement apartment in a quiet area off campus. The first month was fine and without incident, but as the days went by, some strange things began to happen in the apartment. One morning, Abby woke up to a kitchen cabinet open. She wasn't that concerned about it and figured that I had just forgotten to shut it the night before. The next morning, a different cabinet was open, and once again, she shrugged it off. However, I went home one weekend, and she woke up to find every cabinet in the kitchen wide open, and the sink running. Needless to say, Abby was scared and spent the night at her boyfriend's. 2 weeks later, we were watching TV, and heard the bathroom door close. I tried to calm Abby down by saying that the fan we kept in the bathroom blew it closed. However, when we went to bed, we thought we could hear someone walking around in our living room. There's no way someone broke into our apartment and hid the whole day only to come out at night and screw around with us. I was home the whole day, and Abby was home from 11 in the morning on. That incident took place shortly before Christmas break, and all was calm in the apartment until February. Abby had gone home for the weekend, and I was home alone, relaxing on the couch and doing homework. It was pretty late at night, so I turned on the TV for background noise and curled up on the couch to sleep. I woke up at 2:32 in the morning to see Abby walking through the front door, smiling but not saying anything. I blinked, still groggy from sleep, and asked if she was okay. She just looked at me and proceeded to take off her shoes and walk into the kitchen. Something about her didn't seem right. Like, this girl looked like Abby and walked like her, but it wasn't her. I asked her again if she was okay, because it was so early in the morning for her to be coming home. Abby looked at me, smiled, and began washing something in the sink. Something inside me felt a profound sense of dread, like I was in actual danger and I needed to get away. As quickly as possible, I went to my room and locked my door. My roommate followed me because I heard someone tapping their finger against the door. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. It just wouldn't stop. I didn't say another word because it felt like if I did acknowledge her, it gave her more strength. I know that doesn't make much sense, but that was my instinct. I curled up beneath my blankets and stared at my bedroom door, almost waiting for her to kick it in. My eyes felt heavy, and the tapping was almost like a metronome, enticing me to sleep. As I drifted back to sleep, the taps seemed to slow down to a trickle. The morning after, I was exhausted. It felt like I had taken 20 Advil PM to help me sleep, but I remembered everything that had happened last night. Cautiously, I left my room and saw that Abby's bed hadn't been disturbed or slept in. I went to the living room, and her shoes and purse weren't there. A cold feeling crept into my spine as I sent her a text asking if she had come home that night. She responded that no, she hadn't, and wouldn't be coming home for another 2 days. But I checked the sink, and the bowl that Abby had been washing had been cleaned and put away. I firmly believe that I was not dreaming or hallucinating, and I know this wasn't some elaborate prank by Abby, because she would never do something like that. I firmly believe something took the shape of Abby that night, and that its intentions were not good. There were a few other experiences in that apartment, but nothing so dramatic as what I went through that night. I'm sorry if this post isn't very exciting or dramatic, but I thought it was worth sharing to get everyone's thoughts on it. Was this a doppelganger? My life had always been simple and predictable. I was an average person in my early 40s, working a regular office job and leading a quiet suburban life. That all changed one day while running errands in my hometown. I was at the local grocery store, pushing my cart down the familiar aisles, when I caught a glimpse of someone who looked exactly like me. It was as though I had stumbled into a parallel universe. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. What I now know was a doppelganger, dressed in the same casual attire I was wearing, stood a few feet away, their gaze locked onto mine. There was no smile, no gesture, just a mirror image of myself. I blinked, hoping it was a figment of my imagination, but the doppelganger remained there, unmoving. Fear and confusion welled up within me. What did this silent twin want? Was this a sinister omen, or merely a bizarre coincidence? People around me continued shopping, oblivious to the uncanny spectacle before them. It was as though the world had frozen, and I was trapped in this surreal moment with my identical counterpart. I tried to step closer, but the doppelganger mirrored my movements exactly, maintaining a fixed distance. It was like facing a living reflection in a never-ending hall of mirrors. The minutes dragged on, but the silent standoff remained. I could feel the weight of the unspoken questions between us. Who were they? And why had our paths converged in this mundane grocery store? The doppelganger's blank expression offered no answers. We just continued staring at one another. Finally, a store employee, seemingly unbothered by our strange encounter, approached me, asking if I needed assistance. I turned for just a moment to address them, and when I looked back, the doppelganger was gone, vanished, as silently as they had appeared. The experience had left me with an overwhelming sense of disquiet and the unshakable feeling that my life, once ordinary and routine, had been touched by something inexplicable. I never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural up until this point, but now I don't know what I believe. I did some searching after this encounter and came across many such encounters as my own. But what do you think? It was the 7th month in 2011, and as most of us call it, the Hungry Ghost Festival. It is during this time when many weird things might happen to the unwary, and many refrain from going out at night. But in my story, staying at home did not prevent one of the freakiest things in my life to occur. I was only 15 then, and all middle school students, like myself, would be tired when we get home. It was a usual day, and the smell of incense in the air was really strong that day, considering all the offerings being burnt. After a cold shower, I went to my nicely air-conditioned room and took a nice, long nap. At around 6:45, I heard knocking and saw my father coming into my room. He told me that he was home, and if I was hungry, we could go grab some dinner at the coffee shop near my HDB. He then left me to continue sleeping. At roughly 7:30, 45 minutes after my father came in, he came in again, and once again, to tell me he just got home. I found it rather odd and asked him why did he come in again. He looked at me with a shocked and surprised face and asked me what I meant. I told him that this was his second time in my room, and he denied ever entering my room and that he just got back from work. We then checked the surveillance recordings on my front door to see if an intruder could have come in or left between the time when we left till the time we got back. But the only people leaving were my parents and myself. No one else intruded or left our flat. I was completely freaked out by this incident and did not know what it meant or why it happened. I guess one of the free spirits probably mistook me for his son, and it was so lonely that he actually asked me to have a meal with him. This was a year or two back. I was in my late 20s at the time, an office worker, living and working in the bustling heart of the city. It was during one of the train rides to work that something strange happened. The train was crowded as usual, with people engrossed in their own worlds, staring at their phone, reading their books, oblivious to the outside world. I was absorbed in a book, trying to make the most of my daily journey. But then, as I looked up to check the station, I saw my own reflection, or so I thought. A man who looked exactly like me stood at the opposite end of the train car. He had the same clothes, the same posture, and even the same book in his hands. It was as though I was staring into a mirror. The only difference was that he was facing away from me, gazing out of the window. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the mind or some kind of coincidence. But as the train stopped at the next station and more passengers got off, I took a few steps towards the doppelganger. He turned around and our eyes met. There was no expression on his face, no acknowledgement of the uncanny resemblance. It was like he didn't recognize me, or perhaps he did and was as bewildered as I was. The train was too loud for us to speak, and yet there was a silent exchange of recognition and bewilderment. As the train journey continued, we both went back to our books, but I couldn't focus. I kept stealing glances at the silent doppelganger, and he did the same. It was like a dream, a surreal moment in an otherwise ordinary day. When my stop finally arrived, I gathered my belongings and made my way to the door, never taking my eyes off the doppelganger. He did the same, but neither of us made a move to leave the train. It was as though we were both anchored to the spot. The doors closed and the train started moving again, carrying me away from the doppelganger. I watched him recede into the distance, still holding my gaze. The last image I had was of his expressionless face, framed by the train window. I never saw him again, and I never got the chance to understand the meaning of that strange encounter. It left me with a sense of disquiet and unsure of what I considered was real and what was not. This story happened to us way back when I was still 22 years old. I used to live with my boyfriend at the time, now hubby, in their old house at Villamor, Pasay City, Philippines. The house was just a bungalow type of house, but it was big enough to have 5 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a restroom. It was just the 2 of us because his parents started to live in Pangasinan after my father-in-law retired as a soldier. So there was this particular day when we decided to buy some groceries, since he already got his salary. We went out and did what we had to do, and finally went home at around 12 p.m. We were so tired from all the buying and carrying of the groceries, plus the hot weather outside. So when we got inside the house, I went straight to our bedroom to change my clothes. But because I was feeling so hot, I thought of heading back to the living room to cool off right in front of the wall fan. As I was walking past our bedroom door, I saw a glimpse of my husband entering the bedroom beside ours. I wasn't thinking of anything fearsome back then, but when he didn't turn on the light, I started wondering, what the hell was he doing inside that other room? The door was also closed, and he was not answering me as I was calling his name. And knowing my husband, he is not like that. So I finally decided to open the door, and I was so surprised to see the room empty. I walked backwards away from that room and then saw my husband walking towards me from the kitchen. I asked him, "Where have you been?" And he told me that he was in the bathroom taking a dump. I told him what happened, and he said that there really is a doppelganger in the house. Up to now, after the whole renovation of the house, there are still some incidents like this happening around the house. So, this all happened in my mid-20s. I was working from home at the time. My job luckily allowed for that during the pandemic. It was on one late August evening. I was working late one night at my home office, the soft glow of my desk lamp casting shadows. It was this night that I first noticed the figure in the hallway. A silent reflection of what looked like myself, dressed exactly as I was. The initial shock gave way to a surreal silence that lingered in the room. My eyes locked onto this replica of myself, standing motionless just beyond the threshold of my workspace. I stood up, and with hesitant steps, I approached. the unease settling in as I tried to reconcile the inexplicable presence. It wasn't just a visual doppelganger. It was as if I had stumbled upon a glitch in the Matrix or something. I don't really believe in that sort of thing, but I don't really have any other way to explain it. The air in the hallway took on a charged stillness, and the encounter became a disruption in the otherwise serene night. As I approached the figure, it turned and walked down the hallway. As I turned the corner to follow it, it had disappeared. Weeks later, it was early September. I was in the grocery store doing some after-work grocery shopping. I was strolling casually through the aisles, checking off things from my checklist. Turning into an aisle, I was met with the figure standing at the end. The silent observer amidst the shelves of everyday groceries. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights became a backdrop to the silent exchange, and a chill ran down my spine as my mind tried to comprehend what I was seeing again. Once again I tried to approach the figure. As I got about halfway towards it, it turned to the left and walked to another aisle. Once again I tried to follow it, but my attempt proved fruitless. I ran up and down the aisles, scanning each one, seeing if I could find it again, but nothing. The rest of the month was quiet. Then, around mid-October, I was walking my dog in the park one evening. The park is usually where I go to settle my mind after a hard day's work, but it became the backdrop for the next inexplicable encounter. As I walked along the tree-lined path, there it was, the silent reflection seated on a bench, my eyes fixed on it, and it became a moment frozen in time. My dog barely reacted to it. It seemed confused that there was two of me, but it didn't growl or anything like that. If anything, it moved behind me somewhat, a slight whimper. The rustle of leaves and distant chatter became the soundtrack to this encounter. I didn't try to approach it this time. This time I chose to go the other way on the path, away from the figure. It was a long time after that I saw the figure again. I thought I'd seen the last of it. There were more encounters than that, but these were the most significant, and they stood out the most. The encounters, initially frequent and vivid, began to shift towards the end of November. The figure's gaze grew more distant, and the sightings turned into fleeting glimpses, whereas before it would appear at the end of a hallway or aisle. By this time, it was appearing in the distance, perhaps on the horizon or amongst trees. Weeks passed, and the sightings dwindled. The once semi-regular occurrence became a rare sight, and then, as abruptly as it started, the encounters stopped altogether. It was a strange couple of months. I've read some stories online, and for the most part they're one-off sightings. Has anyone else been followed by their own doppelganger for this long before? If so, please let me know. This incident was relayed to me by my cousin. She works at the outpatient section of TTSH. Please be aware that the TTSH hospital I'll be writing about is the current, newly built hospital and not the old one. That night was as usual. She was getting ready to go home when one of the nurses there asked her if she didn't mind checking some paperwork before she went, so she decided to stay for a while. The checks didn't take long. She managed to finish the papers before 6:30 p.m, the time when the janitor would come to lock the doors of the respective outpatient sections. As she was walking happily towards Novena, she realized that she had forgotten her wallet. She rushed back to the hospital so that she could catch the janitor before he locked her section. As she was running frantically down the corridor towards her clinic, she saw the janitor locking the door. she shouted for him to stop, telling him that she had left something behind. For whatever reason, he ignored her. She continued running towards him, running and shouting. Finally, as she was about 3 feet away from him, he turned towards her and smiled. What she saw freaked her out. The janitor's face was hideous, and his skin looked as if it had been bitten off by thousands of maggots. Before she fainted, she heard him say,
"Did you forget something, my child?"
When she regained consciousness, the real janitor was looking at her. He asked her what happened, and told her that he was a bit late today, as his son was sick. He helped my cousin up, and then told her never to walk along the corridors again after 7 p.m. He never told her the reasons why, and I don't think my cousin wanted to know either. The following is a story based on a true incident in a hospital where I work. I had a patient quite a few months ago who was transferred to my ward from ICU. When the patient came up to the ward, she was telling us, as in the staff around, what she experienced earlier on in the ICU. Incident happened at around 0100 hours during night shift duty. Patient X was sleeping soundly, but woke up suddenly for no reason. She opened her eyes and noticed that there was someone in white with long hair and bloodshot eyes looking at her. She was frightened by that pair of red eyes and that someone was plainly staring, but not doing anything else. So, my patient quickly closed her eyes and chanted some prayers. Another patient, Y, from the room next door, saw the lady at my patient's bedside and was curious as to how come there's visitors so late at night, and thus called the ICU nurse to ask. The nurse, after hearing this, looked into patient X's room and saw the lady, and then went to go to inform the visitor to go home, as it had already passed visiting hours. The nurse opened the door to patient X's room and entered. She then realized that there was nobody except the patient. So the nurse went up to patient X and asked, "Where's that lady who was just now standing here?" Patient X was so scared that she just cried out. But the following few days after the patient was transferred up, she kept on having a high fever, but doctors could not find out the reason. The above story was told by the patient herself and verified by the nurse who transferred the patient up to the ward, as the nurse was the nurse who saw that someone. Another experience I had was when I was working in one of the wards and had to work till 9 p.m. And that's where the eerie part comes. There was this particular patient who liked to sit on the bed or lie on the bed staring blankly at the fan, which was above her. Me and my friends were curious as to whatever thing she was watching, and so we observed her from far. Maybe she realized that we were watching her, and she turned to look at us with big eyes. We quickly looked at something else, and when we looked at her again, she started to stare at the fan again. Maybe there is really something there for her to stare at. Another story is when me and my friend were doing our rounds to see whether the patients are snugly tucked in their beds and comfortably sleeping. There was this patient who couldn't sleep, and so we ended up talking to her. She pointed outside the window and asked us, "What is that?" Me and my friend looked out of the window, but nothing could be seen except for the next building of the hospital. We told her that is another building of the hospital, but she said no. She said there is something else there which bothered her. She complained that she couldn't sleep because of that. We were shocked. Luckily that time, we were about to sign out, and we told the patient not to worry about that thing and to go to sleep. She refused to sleep, but kept looking outside the window. We then tucked her neatly under the blanket and left her. I asked my friend whether she saw anything, and she said no. Me too. Then, what is it then? When I was admitted to Tan Tock Seng Hospital for appendicitis, I recalled a horrifying tale told by one of the Indian Amma, who always came into the ward I was admitted at to clean the area. Due to boredom for staying in the hospital, I befriended her, and she told me the incident that she had encountered at the old Tan Tock Seng Hospital, which she used to work before. The old Tan Tock Seng Hospital, as we knew it, used to be creepy, with lots of big trees. The lights were very dim and the pathway was rather spooky, unlike now. It was at that night when the Amma was pushing a trolley at one of the sheltered pathways in the building's premises. On the left side of the pathway stood a number of big and tall trees. The sheltered pathway itself was dimly lit, making the whole place look totally eerie. It was at this moment the Amma suddenly caught something moving about among the trees. The movement indicated that someone or something was running from one tree to another at top speed in a funny and strange running motion. The Amma thoughtlessly stopped and tried to focus her eyes on that area by staring at it. Finally, she caught a glimpse of the shape. The figure looked like a man, and he seemed to be holding a fan, similar to which people used to fan satay when they were cooking it. But the strange thing was that he had an incredibly long pair of legs, 2 times the length of normal human legs, and the creature was playing peekaboo with the Amma. It was so disturbing that the Amma left her trolley there and ran away from that place. She asked someone to collect the trolley later on. The Amma related the incident to a security guard, and the guard explained to her that it was probably a hantu gala or pole ghost. Not sure if it meant any harm or not. This is a story about my encounters at NUH. NUH is located near some forested area. I am a staff member of NUH, working normal shift work, and on that particular day I was working the afternoon shift, which ended at 10 p.m. My office was located on the 6th floor of NUH, main building, and directly facing the forested area with big trees and a staircase leading up the hill. If I look out my window, to my right I could see NUS and a small road parked with cars. It was a normal day for me. My fiancé will always wait for me at the 5th floor staircase which leads to my office. There is a door on the 6th floor by the staircase, and you have to scan the staff pass to enter, so strictly no outsiders. The corridor outside my office is always very creepy, and if I turn to my right, I can see the forest again. So, like other days, I walked as fast as I could and never even turned to my right. As I reached the door which leads to the staircase, I pushed the button to unlock the door, but unfortunately, the button didn't work and the door never opened. I called my fiancé to tell him to go up the stairs as I was very scared. There is a small window on the door and I could see him walking up the stairs. While waiting for him to reach the door so I can ask him to get help for me, I turned around, and I don't know why, but something just made me look at the forest, which I never did before. I saw a white figure looking directly at me with long hair somewhere among the trees, but I told myself it was probably just my imagination. Then, suddenly it moved. It looked like it was floating. That was when I realized it was for real. And that was it. I started panicking. I was lucky that it did not come to my direction. I could feel my heart beating so fast and my legs felt like jelly. I was breathing very fast. As soon as my fiancé appeared near the door, I started crying and telling him I need to get out. He told me to calm down, and like 5 minutes later, while waiting, a technician arrived, Probably they saw us from the security cam. They fixed the button, and I was free. It was a bad day for me. Now, my office has moved to the first floor, which is nearer to the A&E, and definitely safer for me and the rest of my colleagues. An average-built foreign national construction man stood there, panting at the counter. Just another industrial accident dressing, so I thought. Being ignorant, the man helped himself to sit, leaving me wondering if it was a prank. I approached him and asked what happened. Later, I found out he couldn't speak or understand the language. I fetched his identity and assisted him into the treatment room. Meanwhile, I informed my coordinator about his condition, and we suspected him of an asthma trigger. I began to reassure him, and, ironically, he lay on the couch bed with his palm tugged on his cheekbone without any answer. He was still wheezing hard, yet posing that beach paradise island relaxation. He looked deep into my eyes and smiled. I was stunned. I left the room and dashed to my coordinator to handle the questioning in the room. The clinic saw an average crowd that day. I continued the operation. Amidst the strong voice of my coordinator in the room, I sensed this wasn't good. Calling for the doctor's review, my coordinator rushed out for assistance. When noises from the room broke into silence, another colleague peeked to help. Minutes later, "Call the ambulance, now," was shouted from the room. Without further delay, I made the phone call and announced to the patients to stay calm. My curiosity grew as I headed towards the room to find the man was unconscious. Meticulously, the doctor inserted a lifeline, but was unsuccessful, while my colleagues resuscitated the casualty with two-man CPR. I could see foam developing from his mouth. Skin was cold and clammy. Eyes were mere bloodshot. Yet we still proceeded with the resuscitation until the paramedics arrived. The ambulance came. No pulse, no breathing. Shortly after investigation, it was declared by the paramedics as a death. Unfortunately, it was the eve of Chinese New Year. Pounding on my disbelief of what happened, some patients made their way out and left large red bags of celebration cookies. The doctor off-rostered himself after that incident. Patients who left never came back. A couple of months later, I received a phone call from HR complaining about the expensive billing usage of oxygen for the employee. Checking the records, sadly, she was referring to that man. I told her of his death. I guess no one knew of the death. Nonetheless, spooks and goosebumps still linger here. Wheezing noises and construction boots' footsteps were often heard. A restless soul? Or just an ordinary legend of the mind's illusions? This story took place during my army days a couple of years back. 12 of us from the same camp shared the same interest in exploring haunted places and looking for ghosts. We went to places such as Lim Chu Kang Chinese Cemetery and Mount Pleasant Cemetery in the dead of night for that adrenaline rush. Fortunately, I did not encounter anything strange until we decided to explore the old Changi Hospital. The old Changi Hospital has since been renovated into a spanking new hospital. However, before that, it was just an old, abandoned, dirty and run-down building. For those of you who have been there, you would know what I mean. This group of friends and I attended a campmate's birthday party at a chalet nearby, and someone suggested that we check out old Changi Hospital since we were already there. We left the party at around 11 p.m. and proceeded to our destination. When we reached there, we followed one of my friends who had been there before. We entered through a side gate leading to a small entrance of the building. When we reached the first staircase landing, that friends suggested that we go up to the highest level and walk along the corridors to the other end of the building. We followed the plan. While we were walking along the corridors, many of us strayed into some of the rooms to peek at its decay. Thus, we did not exactly walk in an orderly manner, with people falling behind and overtaking me constantly. There were about 17 or 18 of us, since some friends had brought their girlfriends along, and I did not really remember who were around me. When you are nervous and scared, you do not really pay attention to these details. Eventually, we reached the end of the corridor, and I heard my friend's instruction to take the stairs to the first floor. Those in front started to descend the stairs, and I followed suit. I think I was one of the few who were at the back of the group, thus I just descended without paying attention to the level. I thought just follow the person in front of me, and I should exit at the correct level. For those who had been there, you would know that the stairs lead all the way from the top level down to the basement levels. I just continued going down, level after level, and between each level you had to go down 2 flights of stairs. After descending the first, you had to make a U-turn and descend another before reaching the next level. I saw someone in front of me in a white t-shirt going down the stairs, thus I followed. As I descended the first flight of stairs and was about to U-turn to go down the next, my friends called out to me. I looked up and saw all of them standing at the top. I turned to look at which level I was going to, and it clearly stated B1. "Where are you going?" asked one of my friends. I did not say anything and just climbed up the stairs to meet with them before exiting the building. I did not mention anything about it, as the old folks always said that if you were to encounter something strange or supernatural, do not talk about it immediately at the location. Just act like you did not know anything. So the question still plagues me till today. Who was that person I was following down to B1? People say that hospitals are the most unclean places in the world. I can't disagree with that, especially when I personally experienced something weird. After my O-levels, I was granted entry to a course in polytechnics. I decided to take up a job during the 6 months period before I went. A job agency helped me to find a job in a hospital in the material management department. I was to send all kinds of equipment to wards and OTs in offices, be it medical supplies or office stationaries. Here are some of the incidents. The lift. At the time, the hospital was not officially open yet. Only its ER and other ICUs were in operation. One day I made my round up to the SICU to pass supplies to the ward. I pressed for the lift, and when it came, I pushed my trolley into it and ended it. I pressed the B2 button for my department. The door closed, and suddenly it opened again. Thinking that there was someone outside, I peeped out, but there was no one there. I pressed the close button again, and the same thing happened again. This happened for 4 times, and this hair-raising feeling got to me, and I exited the lift. The door closed, and it went down. Geez, I thought. Maybe something is wrong with the lift sensors. I waited for another lift that did finally come and bring me down to B2, but a shock was waiting for me. When the door opened at B2, I pushed my trolley out of the lift, and the lift on the left, which was the lift that refused to take me, opened at the same time. What came out of it totally shocked me. Out came 2 attendants with a metal coffin, those that hospital used to transfer the dead to the morgue, and the family of the dead. The family was weeping and crying. This really chilled me to the bone. For the rest of the day I felt sick and morbid. Was something in the lift awaiting the arrival of the dead? Was that why it did not allow me to go down? The ward. After a month or 2, my supervisors decided to send a group of friends and I to old Doppelgangers hospital, which was already closed at that time, to retrieve what whatever can be salvaged from the old buildings there. The only two humans that were there were two security guards, a father and son. The first day we went there, I had this feeling that the hospital was covered in a dark aura. The only lift there smelled of disinfectant and death, and it got stuck always in the middle of the 2 stories. Imagine the door opening and you are halfway underground and from the 1st floor. Most of the electricity was out or cut off too. The place, I guess like all abandoned buildings, looked spooky. One day, I and another guy were assigned to count the total number of metal bed frames left in the hospital. We decided to count from the main building first, from the top level down. It was around 5 p.m. when we reached the 2nd story. We opened the ward door with our keys and walked in. It was a Class C ward, comprised mainly of different rooms by partitions, with no doors in front of the partitions, with a long corridor linking every room. We simply looked in and counted the number of beds. I was doing the counting, and my friend was doing the recording. 7 beds. Okay. 10 beds. Okay. Then I came to the second last room. I peeked in and I just continued to the last ward. 8 beds. Okay. But the second last one you never counted. How many beds? Then it struck me why I never counted the beds in that room. I saw a room, fully furnished. There were mattresses and pillows on each bed with cases and all. Looked like a perfect ward in a hospital. And on the first bed right near the door was this old man, dressed in hospital gown and sitting on the side of the bed, looking directly at me. 8 beds. Oh my god, go. I pulled my friend along and walked fast out of the ward, not daring to look to my left as I passed the particular room. My friend thought I was lazy and whacked me on my back when I was out of the ward. I told him exactly what happened. He scolded me even more. He later told me that when a person were to see any unclean things, they're not supposed to tell others, or their bad luck will pass on to the others. To this day, it still sends chills down my spine just to think about it. There was always rumor, it was going around for some time in the hospital, that something was inside the building. But of course, most of the stories aren't real. Most of them are a fragment of the imaginative human mind. But how do I explain this story? Here is a story about a certain hospital. In this hospital, there have always been complaints from the patients that they were being disturbed in the middle of the night. There would always be knocking loud enough to wake them up, and there would also be reports of pinching by thin air. After some checking, it seemed that all of those complaints were related to one point. All of the complainers would have been warded inside this particular ward. The name eludes me. Let's just call it Ward A. It seemed pretty harmless, but over time the complaints got more and more wild. Soon they had no choice but to close down the ward. However, a doctor offered to try to stay in the ward for a night before it closed. What happened made his skin crawl. He was seated in his bed in Ward A. The lights were still brightly lit. He was reading a book he had just bought to keep him company. It was nearing 9 o'clock in the evening. He yawned. Just then, something seemed to move in the far corner of his eyes. He looked over, expecting to see something interesting, but all that he saw was the chair and the decorative painting on the wall. Disappointed yet relieved, he sighs. 9:30 p.m. The ward's lights are turned off. The doctor switches on his personal lamp that is above his head. Continuing to read his book, he ignores much of the surroundings. 10 p.m. The doctor has had enough of reading the book. He decided to retire for the night. Leaving the light on, he falls asleep. 10:30 p.m. Slight rattling woke him up. He stared at the source of the sound. It seems to have come over from his left side, where the chair was located. He also found that a part of his arm seems slightly pinched. He made a mental note before going back to sleep. 10:50 p.m. Something woke him up. It seems the light was disturbing his rest. He reached out and switched off the light before retiring back to bed. 11:10 p.m. He awoke with a start. He had a bad feeling churning in his gut. Something was not right. The chair, which had been on his left side, had been placed directly in front of the bed. In the moonlight, he could make out a black shape sitting on the chair. That jolted him awake. Now fully conscious, he realized that someone, or something, was mumbling to him. He spun his head over to his left where the chair was. He saw several dark figures staring back at him. Unlike the one sitting in the chair, these dark figures had red, bloodshot eyes. He also saw that more and more of these figures were climbing out of the painting on the wall. Spooked, he screamed. Those shadows just stared back at him with hollow faces. He fainted. After that incident, the ward was sealed for quite a while before a priest was engaged to remove the painting on the wall. Soon after the painting was removed, it seems that everything went back to normal. This is a story that was told to me by my elder sister. She was the kind of person who liked to go exploring and stuff like that. She had this sort of instinct passed down by our dad. An instinct that allowed her to see things others couldn't see. Most people who hear this story might not believe it, except some of her friends whom she told, and who were also there with her on the day that she went exploring. Whoever knows me might know my sister because she is kind of popular. So here I am, telling a story my sister told me about last year. It was about her outing of an exploration which took her to the old Changi hospital. She says that whatever story is written in the True Stories column about OCH mostly isn't true, because she has been there herself and not quite encountered whatever they encountered. But she does have a story to tell from there. My sister, Lynn, was there with her friends last year, 12 guys and 5 girls, during the Hungry Ghost Festival month. She was warned by Dad not to go anywhere bad because the ghosts are surrounding everywhere, but she was too stubborn to listen. She went off with her friends, and they were there to do their ritual, which she was there just to accompany them. But when she was in, she felt a cold shudder. What's lame about the situation was that she was to stand last at the back, while the rest were in front. She was at the back with 2 guys who were her close friends. They were taking a look out the back when they were going through the door to the 3rd floor. She noticed that the door was already open and was stuck open with a block. But what was shocking was that after going through the door, they heard the door close with a loud bang, as though someone was forcing it shut. Being unafraid of anything, they just ignored it and continued to the 4th floor, where they came across 14 good-looking people, guys and girls, who were all very beautiful. They got to know that they too were exploring, so they decided to meet back on the 2nd floor. When they finished their exploration, they continued going up to the last floor to do their ritual. But then they realized something was amiss, but continued the ritual. When they were doing it, they heard babies crying, someone wailing, and dogs barking. They just ignored it, thinking that it's just because they were disturbing them. That's why there were noises. But it still does not explain the noises being heard. Then, when they were packing up to go home, they heard some girl crying as though it was one of them, but none of them were. So, being too freaked out, they decided to walk quickly and meet the other group, which they had just met, and to get out at once. But when they met the group at the second floor, they were alarmed to see one of the girls crying softly. But how could the noise travel so far up was the mystery. After meeting them, all of them went down to go out the back door. But what was shocking was the back door was blocked with some kind of woods, which was not there before. So they decided to go to the front door with the Malay security guard waiting there. So they did. When they were walking to the front, the girl who had been crying earlier was still crying, but what freaked them out the most was when they went out the front door, the whole group at the back of them disappeared and left them 17 instead of being 21. After being spooked, they quickly went to the old man, but all he said was, "There's nothing to be afraid of." But just then, they heard voices laughing, going past them, and heard a guy say, "Goodbye, my friends, nice knowing you." After hearing that, they looked at the old man, but he just smiled at them and said, "Those people you saw are friendly patients who were once here, so you should not be afraid of them." With that, my sister and her friends exchanged goodbyes and continued walking to the bus stop to go home. That was the story she told me, but I'm not sure if it is true. However, her friends with her then said it is, so I'm not sure. So, I am not sure. Back in junior year of high school, when I was 16, my family and I were moving to a new apartment. Near the end of the day, me, my dad, and a family friend, who I didn't really know then and haven't talked to since, were walking from the apartment to the elevator so we could go to the car and grab the last things from it. When my dad stepped into the elevator, the door closed almost immediately. It was specifically weird because the door had only been open for a couple of seconds, and it closed way faster than I've seen an elevator door close before or since. The door won't open, so we're all confused. We're talking to Dad. He can hear us, and we can hear him. Then suddenly, mid-sentence, his voice just cuts off entirely, and the door opens, and the elevator is just empty. So me and the family friend just sort of stare for a second. I step in and look around. No sign of Dad. I step back out of the elevator, and immediately the doors close again, and then reopen, and Dad's just standing in the middle of the elevator, looking dumbfounded. So we ask him what happened. He explains, from his perspective, that after the elevator door closed, at one point he stopped hearing us and the elevator went up. Then, it just stopped, and he heard what seemed to be wild animals he couldn't quite identify, and the sound of scratching on the door. This felt like it lasted around 5 minutes to him, before suddenly the elevator door opened, without the elevator ever feeling like it went back down. We lived there for over a year. We never did figure out what happened, and the elevator never did that again. My daughter got a book for Christmas. It's this really sweet little book that plays the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and each page has some artwork on it. The first page has 4 ducks floating down the same stream, 3 yellow ducklings, and 1 brown duck. The ducks are all facing the same way. Now, this is important. My daughter is 1, so right now she loves counting and repetition. Every time we see the ducks, she points to them, and I count them out aloud. I've done this at least 100 times already. I'm not even kidding. She loves this book and won't leave it alone. My husband has also read it to her loads, and he saw what she was pointing at. And he saw that she was pointing at the ducks, so he started counting aloud too. I was reading it to her this morning. It's a very short book, only like 8 pages, and my husband was watching. Everything was normal until my daughter flipped to the first page again with the ducks, and my husband and I at the same time went, "What the hell?" The duck at the back of the line is facing the other way. I shit you not. I've looked at these ducks so many times over the last few days. I've counted them out God knows how many times, and they were all facing the same way. I would literally bet my life on it. I thought at first I could maybe explain it as overtired parent gets it wrong, though honestly, I know this book like the back of my hand, so it seems like a massive stretch. But it's also the fact that my husband noticed at the exact same time as me and was weirded out too. We both looked at each other and back at the duck, and we're both in agreement that it's changed. I've read things on this sub before and have always been like, oh cool, I wish something like this would happen to me. But now that it has, I feel nervous and also a bit crazy. I'm so glad my husband is in the same position as me though. It confirms that I'm not going mad. I have an 18-month-old baby girl, and part of our routine is every Monday we walk from our flat to a park and back, via a different route through another park because she likes to look at the cherry blossoms. We've done this every single Monday for about 13 months now. I never change the route, and it's roughly the same time every week. We took off, got to the first park, and all was okay. But for some strange reason I felt like I was in a panic. My heart rate was high. I felt a bit anxious. I didn't really want to stay, but my daughter was having a good time. Eventually I worked out that there was no one else in this park, just us. And it's usually quite full, so I thought that must be it. We started our walk home, where we changed the route to walk through the second park, which has the cherry blossoms. I know this route like the back of my hand. We crossed at a set of lights, and then take the first right, and up the hill to the park. Not a complicated route. I was walking with my head down, and suddenly realized I have no idea where I am. I've never seen this road before. I've lived in this city for 16 years. It felt completely off. No cars, no leaves. Every road here is covered in them, and conkers. No wind. It was deadly silent. I went to stop and walk back the way I came, presuming somehow I'd managed to scrub the route. Suddenly a car drives past with a woman in a brown jacket and hat and a pair of black sunglasses. I think, well, I'll just keep going. We'll end up at the park somehow. Then another red car, same woman, with the same jacket, hat and glasses. The car is slightly different. I think that's a bit bizarre. Then it happens again. Red car, woman in a brown jacket with a hat and glasses. I pick up the pace and go down a different street, but something felt really bad about going that way. So I kept going straight, and after about 20 minutes of walking, I get to the end, and I'm on the road that takes me to the park I was aiming at. But suddenly, all noises, leaves, and cars are back. I go to the park and check my phone, and it's 2 p.m. I left the first park at 10:45 a.m. It takes 25 minutes to get from that park to the second one. I couldn't have been walking for more than 20 minutes down that street. The following day, I woke up early for work and I couldn't stop thinking about the road, so I left earlier in my car. And I couldn't find it anywhere. I tried 2 different ways, where I entered and where I exited, and the routes I ended up on were not that road I walked down. I just can't work it out. I couldn't sleep for 2 days thinking about it, and now I can't stop seeing the face of the woman in the brown jacket. But I don't remember ever actually acknowledging what she looked like at the time. Let me start by saying this will be long. My heart is already beating fast telling this story. Only those closest to me know that this happened, until now. When I was 25 years old, I was driving home from work one night. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. I was driving on Sunset Boulevard, heading west towards my apartment in Brentwood. For those that are not familiar with the area, there is an expanse of sunset near UCLA that is very curvy. It is 2 lanes on either side with no shoulder. It was 8:30 on a Saturday night, so there was some traffic. I was driving along, and all of a sudden about 50 feet in front of me, I saw a car, but I was looking at the passenger door. A car had spun out of control, and it was perpendicular in my lane. I didn't have time to stop. I looked to my right and saw there was a car next to me, so I had nowhere to go. I instinctively turned my car all the way to the right anyway. Once I'd cleared the first car, I spun it all the way to the left, still trying to avoid the second car. While all this was happening, I remembered a time with my mum at Disneyland when I was 3. This is not a memory I've ever had. I vaguely remember parts of that trip, but this memory was not one of them. I realized then that my life was flashing before me, and I was going to die. I had never been so sure of anything. Every part of me knew I was about to die. I started screaming. To this day, I don't know if I vocalized anything or it was all in my head. I yelled, No, this isn't fair. I'm not done yet. All the while, swerving all over Sunset Boulevard. I suddenly stopped my car and was now perpendicular in the opposing lane of traffic. I looked around and there was not a single car anywhere. It was like everything had been wiped clean. I put my car in reverse and proceeded home. I did not see a single car the rest of my way. I was only 5 minutes away from home at that point, but Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night was completely empty. I got to my apartment and parked on the street. I didn't see one person. While walking to my apartment, I came to the conclusion that I had died, and because I said no, I was stuck in some limbo. I had never wanted my roommate to be home so badly. Unfortunately, she wasn't. I called one of my best friends and said, I need to ask you some questions. Please just answer me and I will explain after. I asked her my name, my age, what city we lived in, and the date. Obviously, she was very alarmed. I explained that I thought I was dead, and I wasn't sure I was really on the phone with her. She tried to convince me that I was alive and that everything was okay. There was no way mathematically to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. This moment has haunted me my whole life. There have been times when I have questioned my existence. I have wondered if my life since has been a very detailed death trip, and I'm actually lying on Sunset Boulevard, bleeding out. After many years of meditation, spiritual practice, and belief in quantum physics, I wonder what life I jumped into. This happened to me in December 1969. I am a retired RN. I've experienced or witnessed many things that are beyond understanding, but I am also a critical thinker, and my story changed my thoughts on our limited view of reality forever. I was with my high school boyfriend on a typical Friday date night in Jeffersonville, Indiana. After socializing with friends at the local hangouts, we would ride out on the rural back roads that were located between downtown and my home in a subdivision. There were dairy farms and cornfields on either side of the road for about 6 miles. The few homes along this stretch sat on the back of properties, and there were a couple of equipment paths that led to small open fields that were our, teenagers, parking spots. Past that, the 2-lane narrow road was heavily wooded, with no homes or cleared property for 10 miles. This particular road had many curves and hills, which is typical for southern Indiana. Sparse population and teenage driving led to many accidents. There were no cell phones in those days, and SOP if one saw an accident was to stop, help, and pray for another motorist to appear to flag down descent to the nearest house to call the police and ambulance, or transport the victims to the hospital yourself. It was a very cold December night, and snow flurries began. We left our parking area immediately as my curfew wasn't to be missed. The remainder of our drive to my home was through the wooded area, and on straightaways, we saw taillights quite a bit ahead. As we were approaching the second sharp curve, we saw headlights shining from ground level and at an angle towards us. We immediately slowed and pulled as far off-road as possible. The grille was damaged and the passenger side had struck trees. The headlights in the otherwise pitch-black night were blinding. A fully restored, beautiful 1956 Chevy had apparently tried to take the curve too fast and had lost control. The car was off the road on its roof. My boyfriend, Greg, grabbed his flashlight, got another for me, along with a first aid kit from the trunk, and we ran to assist anyone that might be injured. The headlights had kept us from seeing how many passengers the car held. I clearly remembered my heart pounding from the adrenaline, and my mind fearing injuries as nobody was shouting back to our calling out, and nobody was attempting to get out of the car. I could smell the strong odor of gasoline and burnt rubber. The engine was running and making a knocking sound. Greg got down on his knees and opened the driver's side door, and I opened the back. The car was empty. He reached up and turned the ignition. The engine was now off, and the woods were silent. Nothing was making sense. Our headlights and flashlights were giving us light, and we started searching for a possible injured person. The windows were rolled up and starting to fog. Greg had already searched the interior. At this point, our assumption was that the driver must have gotten out and we just hadn't seen him or her. We didn't understand why they hadn't answered us as we ran to help, or why the car had been left running. We continued to search for a person around the wreck. We tried to go into the woods, but the underbrush and steep embankment was impossible to climb. At this point, we decided whoever was driving may have just walked away. We got back to Greg's car and drove slowly 3 miles back, then turned around and drove slowly the next 6, fully expecting to find someone needing a ride home or to a phone. We were relieved that the driver must not be hurt, but couldn't imagine why they didn't see us and how they had left on foot without us seeing them. No other vehicles had come down the road. At this point, the remaining road we drove was covered with snow, and we saw no tracks. There were no houses. We went to my house where my parents were waiting as I was really late. Greg told my father what had happened, and then described the car and how beautifully restored it was, in case he knew to whom it belonged. The whole incident just left us baffled. By the next day, we decided that maybe there was a house in the woods or side road that we missed. We both were just unsettled by it. We didn't know why we were worried about what now appeared to be a non-event. The next day, we went back to the scene of the accident. Both of us felt that we would find a house close by that had gone unnoticed, or a side road or something. We didn't understand why we were still dwelling on it. But little did we know that quite the opposite was what we found. The car was still there, but had been moved into a clearing in the trees. I will never understand what happened the night of the Chevy, whose taillights we followed, hit that curve and rolled. There it was, still on its roof. The damaged grille and front fender damage. The accident on Friday night. Here we stood on Sunday afternoon at the car. The paint was faded, body was completely rusted through over the majority of it. Tires were completely rotted and rims were rusted. The interior was dry rotted and covered with mold. The windows were gone and the windshield was broken with a baseball-sized hole, full of vines growing into and out of the car. The embankment we had tried to search was now a clearing, and setting further back into the woods was a small abandoned two-room shack. We later did a property search, but it only led us to owners that had bought acreage with a shack and a car on it. All we were left with was a lifetime of questions surrounding a cold December night. It has been years now, but that night still haunts me. I have never openly shared this story, aside from telling a couple of people that I'm closest to. Even they do not believe me. Not that they would ever say so, but when you really know someone, they don't have to. I will synopsize by saying that I believe that for a mere 1 to 2 minutes, when I was in junior high school, I had some sort of time slip, or involuntary spontaneous warp into an alternate reality. The only difference between this one here and now that I was able to ascertain from such a brief trip was that in the timeline in which I found myself, I had never moved back to the southern US where I was born, and instead stayed in the Midwest in Wichita, Kansas, where my family had moved for a little over a year's time when I was aged 11. When I was in 5th grade, my mother and stepfather separated. My mother, sister, and 2 girl cousins that lived with us at that time packed up and moved from the Bible Belt to Wichita. My older brother, who is a good bit older than I am, had met a woman online who lived there and married her, so he urged us to come to the Midwest where he had found happiness. So we did. I actually really loved it there. But just as I had started to find my stride and feel like I belonged, after about a year exactly, my mother had decided to move back to our original tiny southern town. She was having a hard time with her mental health and had reconciled with my stepfather. So I reluctantly said goodbye to the city life I'd grown to love and my new friends, and picked up right where I left off with my lifelong friends at the school I'd attended most of my life in my hometown. Looking back, I can see that as a defining moment to how the rest of my life was to go. If I had stayed there, I'd be a different person right now, without a doubt. But at that moment, I was still just a kid, so I didn't really get too meta about it. I was sad to say bye, but happy I didn't have to completely start over in an unfamiliar place. Now for my time slip, warp, or whatever you want to call it. About a year exactly from the time we returned to our hometown, I was in the 7th grade. A day like any other. It was lunchtime and I stood in line with my peers, just chatting and waiting for the line to move up to get some chocolate milk from the cafeteria. I remember vividly the boy I'd had a crush on my whole life was standing behind me, which was different, but not in a bad way. And we were maybe flirting, or I hoped we were. He made some playful comment to the effect of, "You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy," which was a line that people thought pretty clever to say for several years after I moved back from Kansas. But I smiled like it was new cause crush. I had my back to the cafeteria wall, and I was leaned back, propping on it, just waiting for this line to move. I had this wave of what felt like vertigo, like I was off balance and about to topple, but I wasn't at all. My ears began to ring loudly, and my vision almost slowly faded into black. Like when you stand up too fast and your vision blacks out, but more slowly than that. My head was swimming for a moment. Then, it was foggy. When the fog lifted, my vision faded back in from the blackness. My ears were still ringing somewhat, but that too was fading out and tapering off. I remember confusion and just generally not understanding what I was seeing. I was still in school, and I was still standing in the cafeteria with my back leaned against the wall. But I wasn't in my hometown any longer. I was in Kansas again. Next to me, and obviously having been laughing and talking with me, were two girls that I remembered from my time there. They were older than I'd last seen them though, like I was also. These girls were classmates and friendly acquaintances. They had liked my accent and loved teaching me curse words in Spanish. But when I had lived in Kansas, they were not close friends at all. However, now they were. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. These were my best friends in this reality, the reality or timeline in which we had never returned to the South or left the Midwest. I registered first the fact that I was here, in this school and city, because we had not moved back to my home state and town. And as soon as I did, it was just accepted as fact. Like, oh yeah, that's right. And it was as if everything since we had left, all the last year of events, were undone and gone from memory. Then I was observing my friends, and my friendship and how it grew with these girls was coming back to me. Not each piece at a time, but like abstract knowledge, downloading in my subconscious in large chunks of data. Because I was so discombobulated, I can't put an exact time that my consciousness slipped into this other me's reality, but I believe it was only a couple of minutes, a few minutes at best. I had not spoken a word because my brain was running processing software with all its computing power. I did not get to the caught up mentally place of verbal speech before the ringing in my ears and dizzy head swimming confusion set back in. Only this time, not slowly but crazy fast. I literally felt like I snapped back into this new me's current reality like a rubber band. It was like the universe had noticed its mistake and snapped me back, correcting its error as quickly as possible. I think the correction put me back at the same moment in time I was at before the slip, because no time seemed to have gone by for anyone else. I looked around and said, "Am I back here with y'all now?" to my crush, to which he just looked at me like I wasn't making sense and said that the line was moving, and that was that. Anyone experienced anything like this or comparable? This must be the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life, so I hope you guys don't do it. I was passing by the old, renowned Holland house, which was said to be haunted by a demonic force, and was recalling all the ghost stories that I've heard about it there. I was returning home from a friend's place, and since it was around 5 o'clock, I decided to check the place out. The funny thing was that the gates were not locked. So I went in and through the front door without anything happening to me. I explored the whole place, which was quite big, till I decided to conclude that there was no such demonic force in that place. But then, I came across a door which I had not seen earlier on, as it was around the back, just when I was about to leave. So I checked my watch to see if father time permitted me to explore the place, as I had to be home by 7 for dinner, as I promised my mum. The watch said 6:40 p.m, so I continued my exploration after deciding to take a cab back later. Before entering the door, I realized that there were 3 numbers carved near its hinges It said 666. I laughed. Must be satanic. And I entered the room. I saw this chair at the corner and decided to take a seat for a while, as all the walking had made me tired. I realized that I was in the kitchen that was kept quite neat for such an old house. It was getting dark, so I decided to leave. Just as I got up, I heard a growl. Thinking it was a stray dog, I turned with caution, slowly. And there was nothing there. It started to freak me out, and I briskly walked to the door I came in from. Although there was a back door, I did not want to take a chance that it might be locked and waste time. By this time, the sky was dark, and my watch said 7:20 p.m. Whoa, I thought I'm going to be fried by my mother. But a half-human howl made me look back into the kitchen. In the shadows, I saw a creature with a head like a dog, but it had horns for its ears and was standing on 2 feet. Then some unseen force slammed the 666 door shut. This time I dashed to the back door and prayed that it was not locked. Lucky me, the door swung open easily, and I dashed out to hail a cab. But on the way out, I saw a skeleton of a dog, with its skull 2 to 3 feet away from its body, and a weird-looking footprint in the mud out of the back door. The cab driver asked why I looked so pale, and I told him everything. He said I was stupid and should not have tried, as he himself knew of a lot of people who have had their share of experiences. I returned home for free and told my mother why I was late to escape her wrath. Although she didn't believe me, she let me off. Till now, I still cover my head with a blanket when I hear the howl of a dog. Although a lot of people may have experienced ghost encounters, rarely do you have such a close proximity with someone who is demonically possessed. My brother, someone whom I thought could never be the one I fear, had gone through a series of demonic possessions recently. It's quite lucky that it doesn't happen anymore. It all began with weird behavior, shutting himself out in the room, coming home late, and being quite antisocial. All of a sudden, my family was thrown into a disarray of the most unexpected incidents that we thought we could never have experienced, considering how pious my parents are. It happened during May and June. He first started passing out suddenly in school. The school thought it was just a health problem. Then, it grew a little bit worse, with my brother suddenly staring blankly and not seeming to hear what others were trying to tell him. Finally, he started passing out and then waking up to be something else, mumbling and muttering in a totally different language. He would thrash around wildly, and the school, being so dumb and not professional, called the ambulance, who of course weren't in the right capacity to do anything about it. It kept happening all the time in school. Him passing out and going hysterical. His eyes would be open and bloodshot, and he had tried to strangle his teacher as well as his friends. He could shove away many people holding him. He was unusually strong, and he would speak in a foreign language, half like some Buddhist chanting, and half something animal-like, hissing and growling. We brought him home many times, but rarely did it happen there. He could not remember what happened, except that before he blacked out, he said he could hear a distant laughing and drums beating, which came nearer and nearer, and finally he would feel giddy and pass out. During that period when it all went berserk and worse, my brother would continuously, day after day, pass out. My mother would sleep in his bedroom, and she once told me that she woke up one night because she couldn't sleep well, and she saw this dark figure standing by his bedside. She called out. She thought it was him, but it disappeared the moment she saw it. One morning my school started late, and so did my sister's. We were alone as my mother had gone to buy some groceries. I bathed and kept having this bad feeling that he would start suddenly. When I came out of the bathroom, the phone rang. Just when I was about to pick it up, I heard some deep growling in his bedroom, and I froze immediately. I tiptoed to his bedroom and saw him thrashing around in his bed wildly. We tried reading some holy verses, and it seemed to get worse. It was the last straw. We called up a friend of my mother's for help. We spent a lot of money and time then. It was quite a waste, and never seemed to help. It grew worse. He would be flung against the wall, and would grow hysterical when he went for religious classes, especially when he heard the call for prayer. Even when his friends all sat on him, he threw them off and started punching at everyone. The incidents happened regularly and repeatedly. We were so afraid that it would continue for a long time. He would suddenly shut himself in the room and scream and throw tantrums. The door to his room would close suddenly, and he would keep saying that he saw 3 women, all ugly and fiery, laughing at him. These 3 women had long hair and vampire-like teeth, and were all naked, as so described by him. He even dreamt of them. It would also happen in the hospital whenever the school sent him there. During the evening around 7+, he would suddenly become another person, and would talk in a low growl and describe the 3 women. It seemed like he was possessed by a lot of things. He would hiss and tell his story with his deep breathing. We called an ustaz, and he managed to make things go away, even though he was still acting strange, and it was now that it didn't seem to happen anymore. He was said to be possessed by some animal and Buddhist ghost. The animal was some alien-looking thingy with vampire-like teeth, and we knew how it looked because he drew it. He was into witchcraft. He got interested after watching Buffy and The Craft and Charmed, and used the internet to look for incantations and spells, practicing it and calling out for them. He thought it was harmless, but now he knows it was wrong. We found many verses and spells among his school notes and papers. We threw them all away the moment we found them. Reincarnation of death or something like that. This story took place in a small town in rural Vietnam. It was told to me by my uncle. People in that town lived in houses very close to one another. There were houses built close together with a mere 5-foot wooden fence separating their backyards. The backyards doubled as their kitchens. Back then they didn't have that great of a refrigerator to keep their meat from getting spoiled. So the only way for them to keep their meat was to put salt in the meat and store it in the kitchen in the backyard. They didn't have any special container to put it in, but just inside a shelf on the table. Everything was well and peaceful in that small town, until something strange happened to a family. On the night when it all started, the housewife of that family routinely stored their extra meat in the backyard. The next morning, as she was making breakfast, she found a piece of meat missing. Furious, she went around asking everyone in the family where or what did they do with the meat. Nobody knew what happened to that piece of meat, and they didn't give it much thought either. The housewife too, although a bit upset, just went to the market and got more meat. That night, she did the same thing again with the extra meat, but this time she kept it in a different shelf to make sure no one would take it away. The next morning, she went to the backyard and checked, but again, found the meat missing. By this time, she was very upset. She complained to her husband that their meat was stolen 2 nights in a row. They decided they should investigate further to solve the problem. The husband suggested that they stay up that very night and keep an eye on the backyard. They were determined to catch the culprit that very night. That night, the couple sat by the window overlooking the backyard. They turned off the lights after their children had gone to bed to make sure no one could see them from outside. It was a hot, full moon night, with only the sound of crickets and owls howling. Everyone in the small town was already in bed by midnight, except, of course, the couple who was getting more and more anxious. It was slightly after 1 a.m. when the couple saw the shadow of a person jumping over their fence into their backyard. Under the bright moonlight, they could work out it was a woman, though they couldn't see exactly who she was. Then, the woman walked closer and towards the piece of meat sitting in the shelf, just a few feet away from them. "Once she gets her hands on the meat, we will rush out and catch her red-handed," the wife whispered to her husband. As the woman reached out for the meat, the couple slowly moved towards the door. However, they were stunned by what they saw next. The woman was holding onto the meat and eating it raw. Under the bright moonlight also, they saw who the woman was. She was actually the old lady from next door. What gave them the creeps was the way she looked. The old lady looked as if she had been possessed. She was taking big bites and tearing the meat apart with her sharp teeth and fangs. After finishing up the meat, she just ran and jumped over the fence like a strong youth. The next morning, the couple went over to the neighbor's house to consult with them over what had happened. Of course, the neighbor was shocked to hear what had happened and refused to believe that it was the grandmother of the family who did it. The neighbor told them that it was impossible because the old lady had been very ill for the last couple of days. The couple thought they have been mistaken, but didn't give much thought to the old lady. That night, the husband and wife went out of town for some dealings. They left their 1-year-old baby at home with a babysitter. By midnight, the babysitter had put the baby to sleep and was sitting in the living room waiting for the couple to come back. The couple, however, did not come back until almost 1 o'clock. Just as they stepped foot into the house, they heard a loud scream from the baby's room, followed by an agonizing cry. The three of them rushed to the baby to see what had happened. As soon as they got into the room and turned on the lights, the parents' darkest fear came true. The old lady from next door was on her meat hunt again. However, there was no meat in the backyard that night, so she had come into the baby's room and was gnawing on the baby's arm instead. The old woman was clearly possessed by a demon. Her pale face and fangs showed it all. She had no sense of what or whom she was eating. The wife gave out a loud scream and the husband rushed towards the old lady to push her away. The old woman fell off the bed and jumped out through the window. The husband grabbed his son and dragged his wife and babysitter out of the house. They yelled for help from the neighbors, and soon a few people had come out. The husband explained what had happened while the doctor attended to the baby. The neighbors were equally shocked, but they were determined to get the demon. They rushed to the old lady's house, but found no one at home. So they broke into the house, running from room to room, looking for the old lady, but she was nowhere to be found. They all ran back out to see if she had got out of the house. One of the neighbors spotted someone on top of the roof and started to call out for the others. The neighbors surrounded the house and tried to get her down by throwing rocks at her. However, the harder they tried, the louder she would laugh at them. So they decided the only way to get her down and to get rid of her at the same time was to burn down the house. They moved whatever valuables out of the house and started burning the house from the inside. Stubbornly, the demon was still on top of the roof. Everyone was standing around the house, watching it burn down with the old lady on top. As the house was burning into an inferno, the demon was still up there, taunting at them and running around on the roof. Soon she was trapped in the fire. As the house collapsed, the old lady fell down with the house. They all heard a blood-curdling scream that sounded so evil. And then there was silence, and that was the end of it. The next day they searched the burnt-down house but couldn't find any ashes. All they found was a very small skull. Nobody knew what happened to that old lady or her family. Rumors had it that they had moved out of town and the old lady had died before that night. What the people saw that night was a demon that had taken over the body of the old lady. This story may have sounded like a story in the movies, but it really did happen in a small town in Vietnam long ago. Sometimes in life, there are a lot of unexpected things. Seeing ghosts or listening to a ghost story is one, but there are more out there than just ghosts. You see, in my opinion, it is not ghosts that hurt you, but demons. The following are true accounts of demonic possessions and exorcisms. None of them are made up or an exaggeration in any way whatsoever. Before I go on with my story, I would like to make some issues very clear so as to help in understanding these accounts better. As Christians, we believe very strongly that we have power and authority over demons and evil spirits. It is not because we are so great or we have methods to do so, but simply the fact that Jesus died and he rose again. He has defeated the source of all evil. Before he was taken up into heaven, Jesus gave that power and authority to his people, those who believe him as Lord and Master. The Bible talks about it in great detail. I am a first-hand witness to that fact through my many victorious encounters with demons and evil spirits. The following stories are from the Philippines, where I spent about 6 months. Here we go. I've seen many demon possessions through the years. People who at one moment are so normal as anyone you see in the streets, and the next, they are a total different person. In a flash, they become so aggressive and violent that sometimes it would take a dozen just to hold them down. It would be amazing to see sweet little angels who turn into foul-mouthed demons. I can tell you that all the bad words that you know are nothing compared to what these lash out when the demon within them shows itself. There are others who make noises like animals. I know of one who meowed like a cat and barked like a dog. I have seen some that act like monkeys. There was this case of a group of Christians who went to do deliverance in an HDB house. Deliverance is the word Christians use for an exorcism. I shall thus use that too. When they got there, the demons inside the person knew they were coming to kick them out, and became very violent and started shouting and screaming at the top of their voice. As the Christians started to cast out the demon, it leaps over the people and jumped out of the living room window. Everyone there got the shock of his or her lives. You see, they were on the 9th floor of the building. Everyone thought that the person must have died, but they were in for another shock. When they looked down from the window, they saw the person standing and laughing at them from the ground floor. Well, to cut the long story short, they managed to catch the person and cast out the stuntman wannabe demon out of the person. There are even those demons that hiss and move like a snake on the ground. The reason why these demons do that is because they want to sidetrack everyone. They cause the people to be taken by all these antics and not focus on the real thing. They also do these things to instill fear in the midst of the people who see all this. Fear is the main weapon that demons use to keep people in bondage. One afternoon, one of the church friends came to look for me. He told me that a man came and sought help from him. He told him that he was tormented by evil spirits in his home. So this brother and I went over to his house later in the afternoon. His house was in the corner of the road junction and stood beside a huge tree. I later learned that the tree itself had many, many stories of its own. When we got into the house, it felt rather dark and dank. There was an unpleasant feel to it all. The man sounded very troubled and nervous throughout. Then, all of a sudden, he began to break out in cold sweat and just stared towards the kitchen. Then he told us that the evil spirit was looking at us from the kitchen. We told him to calm down and decided to go take a look, and also to reassure him that there was nothing to fear. So I walked to the kitchen. As I mentioned, the whole house felt funny, but I didn't find anything more unusual than that. He then told me that as I made my way to the kitchen, the evil spirit left. My friend and I decided to return later in the afternoon as we had a meeting to attend to, and also to get a few others, as we wanted to remove some occult things that were in this house. The occult is an open door for demons to enter and torment someone. I have seen so many in such a state. As we returned in the evening, the man was totally different from the one we met in the afternoon. He was no longer the hapless and needy man who wanted a way of his troubles, but was rather defensive and reluctant. After much time trying to talk to him, he refused to allow us to remove the objects from his house. In any deliverance, we can't focus a person to be free. We can cast out a demon, but if the person does not want to let go, the demons will not leave. So that night, we had to leave him, though we would have loved to see him freed from his torment. Another afternoon, I was resting and was about to take a bath. One of the church members came with her daughter. She requested prayer for her daughter, as her stomach had bloated twice the size in less than a day. She told me that there was another woman after her son-in-law, and she put a curse on her daughter to get her out of the way. Folks, I saw her stomach for myself, and I am sure she was not with a baby. I did not do any mumbo-jumbo stuff. As a Christian, we don't need all that. I just prayed the simplest prayer that I think I've ever prayed. There was no hype, no nothing. And after a minute or so, they both left. The next day I met the mother in church, and the first thing I wanted to know was how her daughter was doing. She told me that after they left the place where I was at, within an hour, her daughter's stomach was healed and returned to normal size. She was so thankful to God for breaking the curse that was placed on her daughter. Exorcism or deliverance does not just apply to possessions, but some sickness and diseases are caused by evil spirits. In this case, it was a result of a curse. By far, the greatest victory in exorcism I've ever had up to this point was the one involving what I would call the terror of Caputuan. Caputuan is a town in western Philippines. There was this boy who terrorized the whole town. He was possessed by a demon. I mean, really possessed. He would sometimes go to the town market, and the demons would manifest themselves there. Note the plural, as there were more than one demon inside of him. He would transform himself like a monster, and his nails and teeth would grow in length and size, and he would seize meat from the meat stores and eat it raw. The whole town knew about him and feared him. The worst thing of all was that he was crippled. He has to move around with crutches, but when the demons take over, he just moves around as freely as anyone else does, and even faster than anyone. One day, one of the local pastors told me that we need to go and do something about this and help this boy of 15 years of age. A week later, we, together with another pastor, headed to his house in a farm some distance away from the town. The three of us hopped onto one motorbike, and we were off. Yes, folks, 3 of us on one motorbike. I'll just leave it to your imagination to how that looked like. After avoiding a few potholes and falling off the bike, which we nearly did, we finally reached the house. It was set in a hill and looked beautiful and green all around. One of the pastors asked me if I needed him to translate when I speak to the demons. I told him that there is no need for that. He will understand me. We heard from the boy's father that he was around moments ago, but suddenly he went off to hide himself. The demons knew that we were coming. The first thing we did was to remove all sharp objects and copper from the area, as people who are possessed can become very violent, and we did not want to be caught off guard. Then, we went around the whole house looking for him, and finally we found him inside a back portion of the house. He was very skinny, and as I mentioned, crippled. How could he be the terror of the town, I thought, and I felt compassion for him and anger for the demons that tormented him. Finally, we got him to come out. We managed to get him seated and started the deliverance. The moment I spoke to the demons, the boy began to shut his ears very tight. The demons sure did understand me all right. We demanded the demons leave the boy at once. We had told the demons that we were not interested in their manifestations, but their immediate departure. The demons were speaking through the boy and were giving excuses like they can't come out, as it was day. I shot back at them and said that was a lie and demanded they leave now. It did not take long before the demons were cast out. That's when we learned that the boy was possessed when he was on his way back from school one day, and he met 3 kids. They wanted to be his friends, and he did not know that the kids were actually demons in disguise. They've been controlling him ever since. The deliverance was complete without much hassle. The next day we got him to stay over so that the church could look after him. The aftercare is the most important in these kind of cases. Things were going on well until one night. The demons manifested themselves again. I was not there at that time. The pastor told me that his face turned like a goat with claws and fangs. The pastors tried to control him with the help of 2 other brothers. Sensing the fear in these 2 young chaps, the demons threatened to enter them. Not wanting to take chances, the pastor told the 2 to leave. They spent the whole night battling with the demons until finally they broke through. When the boy came to himself, he confessed that after the first time that he was freed, he did not tell us something. The demons had given him a talisman as a pact between them, and every full moon, he will have to dance with them. He did not throw away that talisman, but kept it. Finally that night, he surrendered it, and it was burnt. He was set free, and until today, he is totally free. The Bible says that he who the Son, Jesus, sets free will be free indeed. And that is very true with this boy. This boy is a witness of Jesus' victory throughout the whole town. For context, this took place in 2007, and I was young, but even after all these years, I cannot figure out what the heck I saw. I truly have only told very few people because I fear them labeling me a nut. I am in upstate New York somewhere, and we were driving at night in a super rural town. There was a little town we drove around in often, so we knew our way around, and we knew shortcuts. On this night, we wanted to go to a party, and we chose to take a shortcut. Note, we were not inebriated at all. Ultimately, that was the goal of the night. This kind of messed those plans up. There was a small side street, and at there, you could turn left into a 1-lane tunnel and cut to the main road. At the end of the street is a lettuce field which runs parallel to a visible train track behind it. There is a pole with a circular mirror pointing at the tracks, I assume for maintenance workers. This mirror is 10 feet off the ground. As we pull up to turn into the tunnel, we stopped a moment as we were just talking, and we looked forward towards the field. I don't know what happened honestly, but there was this tense silence and fear that came over us. And we saw this slouched creature almost squatting and just stared. At that point, it was crouched down and easily we could have thought it was maybe a deer or bear. But it turned its head, looked at the car, and its eyes widened in surprise. They reflected green, like cat eyes, but huge. It stood up, and that's when we realized it had 2 legs, and we could see its shape. Someone whispered, "Turn the high beams on." And when we did, I was so afraid I couldn't even scream. It was very tall, easily 8 or 9 feet, but its spine was still visible as it was skinny, and it walked hunched over. You could even see its hip bones in its shadow. Thing is, it seemed terrified as we were. It took off straight and ran into the woods, so we went flying through the tunnel so we could get parallel and maybe catch another glimpse. But it was gone. Like we had scared it off. The whole drive ended. We went home. I tried to make jokes about it being anorexic Sasquatch, or just hella drunk Shaquille O'Neal in a costume, but it didn't change the feeling we felt, just absolutely shaken. It was like that moment of fear zapped energy from us. No, I did not check the time. I regret not checking the clock before and after. Has anybody ever heard of something like this? Now, this account is not my own, but was told to me by a Marine doing combat tours in Afghanistan. For the sake of his own job and security clearance, he has asked that I not give any names and never mention what region they were operating in. From my understanding, the individuals who were with him during the encounter were from a task force operating under orders for the CIA. Beyond that, I was told next to nothing. I will refer to him as Sarge, if only to have a name. Anyway, here's his story. During a patrol checking on some local farmers, Sarge's unit was made aware of a deadly being living in a cave system near their farms. When pushed for more information, the locals were only willing to say that this being was stealing from their farms and had killed a few people who had made the mistake of trying to protect their livelihood from it. Convinced the locals were being harassed by a group of Taliban fighters, half of Sarge's unit was sent out to investigate and either arrest or kill any hostile forces in the area. So, with a few Humvees armed with M2 machine guns, they went out to the cave where the mysterious being supposedly lived. Upon arrival, they noticed nothing of interest. There were signs that something was living in the cave, and the soldiers found animal bones scattered around the entry. Not wanting to risk his entire unit fighting in a cave that the enemy would know very well, Sarge sent his 2 fastest Marines to investigate. The 2 men just gave the others a cocky grin and a thumbs up before disappearing into the darkness beyond the mouth of the cave. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Not a single sound inside or outside the cave, other than the idle chatter of the bored Marines. Then sound erupted from the cave, shouting and screaming. In a matter of seconds, the 2 men emerged from the cave at full run and zipped past their teammates. One of them shouting, "Run! Just run!" But like the hard-ass special forces operators they were, the other soldiers stood their ground, only to see a massive man emerge from the cave. He stood nearly 10 feet tall, with leathery skin and red hair. In one of its massive hands was a log that it began waving at the soldiers in a very obviously threatening manner. Shocked but not panicked, Sarge commanded his men to shoot, and the 12 Marines opened fire. But the bullets seemed to be doing little more than pissing this giant off. Finally, in desperation, One of them fired a grenade launcher at the being, blowing out a massive chunk of its flesh, exposing a small portion of the ribs and ripping most of the skin and muscle off. The giant retreated into the cave, and the soldiers decided that the best thing to do was to head back to the village and report to the rest of their unit. Clearly, this was more than a few Taliban militants. Even with a gaping wound, the giant was too terrifying for the Marines to willingly walk into its territory. So they headed back and reported to their CEO. Of course, their boss didn't believe them and demanded to see proof. So that night, they drove him out to the cave and showed him some of the shredded flesh that had been blown off by the grenade launcher. From here, the report went up the chain, and nobody knows what was done about this creature. I wish he would have told me more, and maybe you guys can help me find an answer. From what I've managed to find on my own, accounts like this are not uncommon in that part of the Middle East. Of course, since all of these reports were word-of-mouth stories, I don't know how factual they are, or if they're being exaggerated. If anyone out there knows what this thing could have been, let me know. About 2 years ago, I lived in an old house outside of city limits in western Alabama. Wild hogs are considered a nuisance in this part of the country, and thus a year-round game. The land wasn't mine, but it was legal hunting ground, so my landlord gave me and my friends explicit permission to take care of any hogs we came across. So a lot of the time, especially during the winter when this encounter took place, I was posted up on my back porch with a cigar and a gun, either by myself or with company. This land wasn't very clear. In fact, we only had about 20 feet from the porch to the tree line. Then it would go down a hill and the brush would get thicker. So our hunting was just being quiet and looking for the beady eyes of hogs in the foliage when we heard rustling. So, all that being said, one night during my porch sitting, I heard some rustling. I started scanning the woods for this hog, and eventually did come across a set of white, beady eyes. They weren't a hog's though, because these were eye level with me. As my eyes continued to adjust, the rest of the creature started coming into view. It was tall, thin, and had long, spindly arms and legs. Its entire body was completely black. I couldn't make out any other facial features besides the eyes. But what I could make out was that this thing was actually a good ways down the hill. So the fact that it was still eye level with me meant that it was likely around 10 feet tall. It started up the hill, moving towards me. I had this feeling in my gut that my .45 caliber bullets probably weren't going to do much here. So I slowly collected my things and headed back into the house. It didn't make any sound as it moved, other than the slight crunch of leaves. As it climbed the hill, it somewhat stopped at the tree line. It then turned and walked along the edge of it. It bobbed and lurched a bit as it walked, kind of how some large birds bob their heads as they move. That was the most terrified I had been in a long while. But this wasn't the only encounter. My hunting buddies and I all saw it several times, walking through the trees a good bit away from the house, sometimes turning to look at us. My roommate, that moved in later that same year, once walked outside and saw it right up against the porch, looking right down at her. It never tried to attack anyone, or even acted aggressively, so we eventually stopped being as scared, though still very cautious, and started calling him Big Boy. I've told a couple other friends about this. One of them said the description and behavior matched something called a California Dark Watcher. I did my research, and as much as this creature matches up, this was on the opposite end of the continent. I'm still not 100% sure what it was that I saw, but I'm 100% sure I saw it. Multiple people did. Update. just spoke to my old roommate that saw it close up. She said that it was more eerie than downright scary. It looked at her like it was curious, tilting its head to the side like a dog when you're holding something at once. My hunting buddies and I all saw it from 30 to 50 feet away, but she ended up being closer than all of us. She confirmed no features other than eyes, but it had sunken in spaces on the face where there would be features. I understand her not taking a picture. I wouldn't take a picture of a bear if it was 10 feet from me, let alone this thing. I stumbled on this sub about 8 hours ago, and I've went as far as I can with all the posts and comments, and that inspired me to tell a story of what I experienced about 4 to 5 years ago. I've told this story in a Facebook group about supernatural beings in Alaska, and I was mostly laughed at and criticized. So, if you're one of those types of people, please kindly just skip this story. So from the posts I've seen, you guys should be familiar with little people, right? I live in Alaska, so we have both little people and big people. We have our own native words for both of them, and there's countless stories about encounters with them. Big people are basically the same as small, but just taller. A long time ago, before photos were relevant in Alaska, my ancestors lived in harmony with the little people. Yes, they're next door neighbors and shit. They lived like that for a while, until one day, one of the dogs of the native people ate one of the little people's babies, as it had stumbled too close to the dog. Food was scarce to try and keep every single dog pack well fed. The little people leader met with the native leader and suggested that they put down the dog and all would be forgiven. Mind you, this was the native's finest dog and was the leader for many years, and he decided against it. Yes, I know it's kind of petty, and I will never understand why he couldn't sacrifice one dog, as great as he was, and try and craft another leader to keep peace between the peoples. As you'd imagine, both sides split up, and it's been that way ever since. It does fascinate me how life would be so much different if the native leader complied with the deal. I do wonder how it would be to live with them from time to time. Anyway, one winter night in cold-ass Alaska at around 5 a.m., I went outside to smoke a cigarette. It was unnervingly quiet and dark, as it usually is at that time of night. I live in a really, really, really small town that barely stretches across a mile long. Outside of my house, there's one LED light connected to an electric pole that's about a block or two away. There's never anyone out riding their machines or four-wheelers at that time of night, and rarely ever is someone walking around, let alone running. I'm smoking my cigarette, and about halfway through, I saw it at the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was someone taking a jog, but who would be jogging at 5 a.m. on a cold winter night? Not insulting my town, but no one runs here, not outside at least. There are some teachers who do run, but all the teachers were out of town, back with their families in the home state, as it was Christmas season. It was also snowing lightly. I turned to look, and oh hell, this 7-foot humanoid was just blasting down the street. I'm talking Usain Bolt shit, going for that gold. I'm not really great at height perception, but I know he was minimum 6'8" to 7 foot. But here's where it gets creepy. When you run, you move your arms, right? It's just instinct, and I believe it does help you go faster with the right form. When I saw it, both arms were tucked in at the sides of his hips. No arms moving, but those legs were going at least 20 to 25 miles per hour. Approximately 32 to 40 kilometers per hour. I was surprised at this point, but then I noticed something else it was doing. It watched me as it ran by. I can see the rough outlines at the top of its body, facing towards me the whole time it was in sight. No arms moving, only legs, looking at me as it burned through the road. Now, did I say there was a bright LED light a couple of blocks away from my house? And it faces towards my place, but that didn't do any help in trying to scope out its facial features, especially since the light was on the side as it was running, and completely on the other side of its face as it was looking towards me. I watched it go by as it watched me also. It felt like an eternity, but really, it was only about a 10 to 15 second encounter. Right behind it, a fox was chasing it, almost like it was its pet or something. Although it's widely known in the state, big and little people have supernatural powers, one of which is being able to transform into an animal it chooses. So I really don't know if that was its buddy or its pet. I'll never know. As soon as both of them were out of my sight, I went further onto the porch to see where they went. My friend, when I told him about that part, said, "Hey, what if it just turned around and ran towards you when you did that?" That made me realize how dumb I actually was trying to observe its whereabouts, and that I never in a million years would go further onto the porch just to see it again. After I saw it had gone, I couldn't fathom what I just saw until later. But I noped back inside. Even my cigarette was unfinished. I didn't even put it in the cigarette container, just flew it across the yard. I went inside, continued on like it never even happened, went to sleep and wouldn't talk about it for another year or so. I have no idea why. But when I did finally tell my said friend mentioned above, he immediately said the native word we have for tall people. A lot of my people choose to doubt me whenever I tell them about it, and it infuriates me because our culture has been involved with these kinds of beings for hundreds of years. We have a lot of folklore stories, but also we have a bunch of accounts based on true encounters. If you read up on supernatural beings in native Alaska, there are some horrific ones that will straight up scare the shit out of you. This happened a long time ago, and I do think of it time and time again. Like, why? Why did it do that to me of all people? I always heard stories of my friends running into little people, and I never did see them before. I would just be like, man, I wish I could run into a little person or something. Or something. I recall saying that a bunch of times. It's possible that one of their supernatural powers could sense this, like almost mocking me. This is what you wanted to see, huh? I wouldn't go out to places at night unless I had a ride, because who knows what it would do if I saw it again. This went on for about a year. Then I kind of just forgot about it, I guess. Nowadays I can walk alone at night and be much less worrisome. I've done it countless times since then, and if it wanted to do something to me, it damn sure could have by now. People tell me that they choose who can see them and who can't. Their stealth is unmatched, and only a select few can see the big and little people. That's why I wonder, why me? Why did it choose to do that to me? Was it just to quench my thirst for the supernatural, telling me this is for real? I'll never know. I'm certainly not going to ask it. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life living in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny, some were cautionary, but a few were downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched their sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Port Neuf River to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were the 3 Robertson kids, Tommy Bayer, and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next door to the Gooch's ranch. The river there was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to be thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. The kids spent a couple of hours skating when a loud scream came from a willow bush on the riverbank opposite them. The kids could only watch as a giant man, covered head to toe in thick black fur, came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in rage at the kids. They fled towards the sleighs, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and fell back towards the ice. The giant was now crossing the river toward them, screaming and swinging his branch. My grandpa was sure this creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, Lady Luck smiled down on me that day by the river, because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice gave way. It only submerged its shins, but was slowed down considerably as it tried to get back on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother enough time to jump down and cut the laces of my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed up the riverbank and jumped onto the sleigh. As they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there, hollering at the kids and swinging his tree branch. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, there was found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates were found near the tracks. They had both been bent in half like horseshoes. The tracks headed west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could, but deep snow prevented their travel any further. The creature was never sighted in that area again. The story captivated the small community, and soon word traveled across the country of the Idaho wild man. That spring, my great-grandpa decided to buy a ranch in a little lost river valley farther north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said that this encounter frightened him the most. He wasn't sure he would have been killed if the giant hadn't broken through the ice and given his brother a chance to cut his laces.